absolute, because as they conceded, the justice system always panders to the interest of society, to the interest of the people. It doesn't necessarily depend on this higher hierarchy. We don't think this necessarily is important, because justice is supposed to be for the society, and under our case, we've showed you how it actually already does protect society. Now, what are the issues in this debate today? Firstly, the idea of retribution, where does it happen best? Secondly, the idea of its rehabilitation, and thirdly, whether the state should, or whether it's important that the state has this higher order of law. So firstly, on the idea of retribution, and the idea between the state and the family, we think that the state always panders to the interest of society, because we think that retribution is always subjective. It's not something when you have, for example, 10 months of prison, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's proper retribution. We think retribution depends on the people who are affected. And we think that the people who are affected in this case are the family members. And we think that these family members, why are they so different from the society? We think that essentially these family members are part of society and the best members of society to decide, because they were affected by these crimes. So they talked about how these families have no rational calculus, how they won't be able to make this informed choice in the first place. We think that firstly, the idea of whether they will over-punish or so-called over-punish these victims, these murderers, we think that in our case, it's pardoning. It doesn't mean they necessarily say, oh, you're going to be sentenced for 10 months or 2 months. It's whether you'll be sentenced or not. So we don't think this idea of over-punishing exists. And this idea of under-punishing, or whether they won't get this even sentence. But we think that this sentence depends on retribution itself. So we think that when this element, the family who represents society, has been offered retribution, has necessarily felt that they've been rehabilitated, then why not? Why can't the state pander to what the society thinks? Because we've told you how the family is a member of society and the best member of society to decide. Before that, yes.
Why in every case, right, the state has to always find 12 people, neutral people, to become the jury, and now suddenly you just want to put emotion into the law?
We're not putting emotion in the law, because we think that this emotion thing that you tried to say, how they can cry to the jury and all that, already exists. But we think that this element that they are actually directly involved in this case should be taken into account, because we think that if you talk about rehabilitation and all that, we think that if you talk about how these murderers will empathize and how they will persuade the victims, we don't think that will necessarily that's necessarily true, because we think that under your case of justice, these murderers still have this way to persuade the judges, the jury, who were not even affected in the first place. So now moving to the second part, on society, on society and how this removes the fear, how this protects society and all that fear and all that stuff. We think that, I've told you earlier, that these families are the people who have this fear in the first place. When they can rehabilitate, when these people can actually get over it, we think that society can too, because rehabilitation happens when the people who are directly affected are rehabilitated in the first place. Sit down. So, okay, secondly, the idea of rehabilitation. We told you how rehabilitation is very subjective. They never tried to prove to us how this rehabilitation actually exists in their case, how this rehabilitation for the murderer actually exists in their case. Because we think it's arbitrary. This idea of lifelong sentence and how retribution will actually happen in that period of time is arbitrary. We think that rehabilitation can happen in any period of time, and we don't think that necessarily the justice system serves that. Now, secondly, this rehabilitation for the family members. We think that when they've actually forgiven these people, rehabilitation has already occurred. We think that the way for these family members to get over it, to rehabilitate, is by pardoning these victims. So we think that they're restricting this right of these family members to get over this, to rehabilitate. just pander to what the law says, because we need a society that's not cynical, that's not full of remorse and all that. So under our proposal, we've shown you how justice isn't absolute. Justice isn't necessarily certain, because these two ideas of retribution and rehabilitation in the first place are subjective. We don't see, and they never proved to us what were the harms of this. They never proved to us what was wrong with having these family members decide the verdict. Now, thirdly, on the idea of having the state as a higher order of law, and they told us how it's a neutral body and how they always give the justification. But we don't think they proved to us why it's so important. How does this affect the decision? Why is it so important that these bodies who decide the verdict are neutral? We think that it's important for the people who are affected to decide whether or not this criminal is punished or not. Because we told you that essentially these people were the people who are mostly affected. I mean, the society